Hey there. So my next guest is an industry-leading consultant focusing on indie game developers, and he gives some incredible advice. And it's fascinating. He boils down the top two issues that indie studios are facing. Pretty much any studio is facing, and it sounds so simple, but it's so complex. This was a fantastic interview. I know you're all going to love it. Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Gamerpreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bradford Carlton. Today, I have a very special guest with us. I have Jay Powell. Hey there, Jay. How's it going?
It's great. Thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. I'm pleasure to be able to have you, especially since I know what you do. So, Jay, why don't we begin? You just tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
So I have been in the game industry for 20 plus years now, 100% of that on the business, licensing, a little bit of marketing side of the industry. Spent 7 or 8 years as an agent. And so we worked with a lot of companies that are still around. I'm very proud of that. And a lot of companies that aren't still around, and it's a little disappointing, but it's also how the industry grows. I started back in the 90s, and some of the first deals that I did were with Paradox. I was the one that did the first Europa Universalis deal in North America. I sat in on the green light meeting for EVE Online. Starbreeze was a client. A lot of companies that are still around today and doing really good things, which makes me feel like I have that little bitty tiny piece of influence in the industry at some point in time.
Very cool. All right, that's a ton to talk about. But before we do that, I start every interview with a single question. So I'm going to ask you, just like I ask everybody else, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being high, how weird are you, Jay?
I would say a 7 or 8.
Why is that?
I don't think any of us are not weird in the game industry, just simply because of what we've chosen to do with our life. And, we're becoming less weird over time because the rest of society is catching up with us, especially during the pandemic. And so I still get that reaction at the playground when I'm picking up my son at school. And it's like, so what do you do? And I'm like, I'm a business consultant for the video game industry. And they're like, that's a job? And yeah, it is. I've been doing it for a very long time. So I think there's a certain amount of weirdness that comes with doing what we do, because the reason we do what we do is we love this stuff. This is our pastime as well as our career. So
for sure. All right. I love it. Now, Jay, this is the Gamerpreneur Podcast, so I do need your gaming cred. When did you first start playing video games?
Elementary school, early 80s, Commodore 64. Jupiter Lander was my very first game. I never had a console growing up, though. I didn't get a console until I was actually working in the industry and out of college. The first one I bought was a PlayStation, and always a PC gamer from day one.
Okay, so PC gamer. So you got to experience 3D tic-tac-toe and all those games way back then.
Yeah, in between Doom and all the other games that were going to rot our brains and result in us never amounting to anything. But yeah.
Okay, and what do you play today, if anything?
So lately, a lot of Valheim. I have gone back and started Fallout 4 again, despite the fact that I have over 1,000 hours in it, simply for the reason that I don't have the achievements on the Xbox. So I'm going to go and do that again. But in general, I play a lot of different things, so my Switch has pretty much turned into my indie game device. I play things like, Graveyard Keeper and Darkest Dungeon and Stardew on that one. On the PC, I've been playing, like I said, Valheim, but then also Call of Duty Warzone. I have started Red Dead 2 and Assassin's Creed Valhalla, but I haven't got very far in either one of them because, of course, Fallout 4 is on the Xbox now, and so is Skyrim. So I'm sure I'll turn around and drop another hundreds of hours in that. I love strategy games, so I'm playing, the latest Civ, as always, Warhammer 2, Total War, that one. I play a lot of different stuff.
I was going to say, how do you have time?
Oh, I generally don't. That's part of the reason. That's, so.
I've been trying to play Assassin's Creed Odyssey since I got on my birthday last year. Like I'm not even 30% done.
Oh, I did the very same thing. I got it on sale somewhere, and I don't know that I've gotten off the beginner island yet.
Okay. One more gaming question, then we're going to get to, the business side of things. But if, you've had the full complement of basically every game that you've had access to it all. If you could pick one game though as your all-time favorite, which one would it be?
It's different. There's the nostalgia factor, for which I'll go with Galaga, because I seem to pick up that game on any platform or console that it's ever been released on. I love it. I can't walk into somewhere if I see a Galaga machine and not at least play it for a little bit. If we're going with the most hours spent in something, the whole desert island scenario, I would end up with a Civilization or Skyrim. As long as I can get access to the mods. You give me the mods and I can play Skyrim and Fallout 4 forever. But otherwise, something like Civ 6, these games that have immense amount of replayability and endless number of strategies that you can employ to get through it, that's what I'm going to go for.
Not to mention, that desert island scenario, it's one more turn. The day passes, you don't even realize.
Oh, God, yeah. I'd totally starve to death. It's like... Got to go get food because I'm sitting here playing Civ 6. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Beautiful. Let's get over to the preneur part. Jay, could you begin by maybe giving us a little bit about your professional background? How did you get to doing what you do today?
So I started interning. I did the classic entrance into the industry as a evaluator, not a tester. I was actually an evaluator because there was a little company in Durham. I went to school at UNC. And so I was in Chapel Hill, a little company in Durham, put an ad in the student paper for people to come in, play video games, and give us our opinion of it. So I started doing that, and then worked my way up. Once the intern who managed that evaluation process graduated and left, I got bumped up to head intern. So I was managing the evaluation process. And then when I graduated college, they offered me a job. And so that company was Octagon Entertainment. And we, in the late 90s, early 2000s, we were one of a handful of video game agents. And so there's some that are still around, and ironically, some of the ones that were competitors back then, I'm actually a business partner with one of them. But we did exactly what you would expect a video game agent to do. And so you got to remember, way back then, online distribution wasn't a thing. So I got a crash course in contract negotiation and business development because for any one game, we may have 15 or 20 contracts to negotiate because we had to have one for literally every country that it was in distribution for. And so did that for 7 or 8 years, and we transitioned that agency into a casual game publisher. And so when we did that, I built the digital distribution network that we used from scratch. And this is 15 years ago when hidden object games were the key, and we had literally 30 different sites that these things were getting launched on. And it was just basically like setting up the worldwide distribution deals before. You had to have everything for everybody. I did, distribution management plus acquisitions, and I was executive producing games. So I was literally doing 4 people's jobs, and that's the reality of a small company. And so, but we did that for a few more years, and then I left and started my first production company. Back then, we didn't have a name for it because nobody really understood what we did, but we sat in the middle and structured deals between National Geographic and Nickelodeon and Disney, where they needed games made. We would do the design, manage the production, but we would have an outside studio actually doing the work. So we did that for 3 years and tried to make that jump from doing contract work and surviving off of work for hire to doing original content. And the first game that we did as original content did really, really well. And the next 2 did not. And so that was pretty much, that's it. Wrap it up. And that's when I started the Powell Group. So over 10 years ago, and we do business consulting for everybody from developers to publishers to conferences to tech companies. At the end of the day, we track 4,000 and some developers and another 600, 700 publishers. We know what they need, what they want, how to pitch it to them, what they're working on. And it's that level of knowledge and network reach that have sustained us to these days.
Beautiful. I have to know, what caused the one game to do well and the others not to? Was there a thing, or like, now that you've consulting for so long, like you should be able to see it, right?
There really was a thing. So I've always been a big proponent of licenses, especially in very crowded market. You needed something to stand out from everybody else. So we were doing hidden object games, which the demographic for a hidden object game at the time was women 35 and older. So I reached out to my mother and several of her friends and said, tell me the books that you're reading. And I took that list of authors and started basically cold calling book agents up in New York until I got one who knew what a hidden object game was. And we did a deal with an author called Mary Kay Andrews and built a hidden object game off of her latest book that had come out. And it was that whole, we've got an IP, we've got a license, and then we were able to market directly to her followers. And it did really well. And I was asked by a friend of mine who was at a publisher at the time, he's like, how did you get a New York Times bestselling author with a brand new studio that hadn't done anything? I was like, I called them. I mean, it's a lot of the licensing part of this industry isn't nearly as hard as people think it is. You just have to reach out and get information. So that's what I did. I called her and said, look, this is what we're doing. We think it'll be a good fit. And she's like, I love that. And so that's what happened. But it was licensed, and it stood out from the crowd because instead of just another murder mystery game, we had one based on a New York Times bestselling book.
Very cool. And what caused the other ones to not do so well?
They were not very generic, and they just got lost in the mix at the end of the day. I mean, that was if you look at the whole red ocean, blue ocean theory of business, hidden object games 10, 12 years ago was the reddest ocean in the industry. This was before, free to play caught on, with that genre anyway. And you had to have something to stand out. And the second, third games didn't. And that's what it was. They were just looked at as Me Too type titles, and nobody bought them.
Okay. And, with your background here in consulting, is this like one of the primary issues you're seeing with indie studios, that their games may not be doing well because of that? Or is there other factors?
It's always the two factors for 20 some years that have been, the bane of indie developers is funding and discoverability. So, studios are always looking to, find some way to ease the pain of making the game. And, whether that's publisher funding or investor funding or friends and family or angel or whatever, they need to get somebody to help pay for the game to be made. The other side of it is discoverability. I get an email every Monday morning, one on the Steam releases of the previous week and the other one on the Switch releases of the previous week. And you're looking at 250, 300 Steam games launching every single week, and somewhere between, on a given week, 35 to 50 Switch games every single week. And that is still the biggest. It's always been the biggest issue. It's still the biggest issue.
Geez, how does anybody break through that? That's a lot of different games.
Oh yeah, it's ridiculous. But it's one of those things that, and this is what we preach at Indie Game Business, you have to look at this. It's like, we understand that you are making games because you enjoy making games. But at the end of the day, this is a business. And we always tell people, if you want to do this as a career, then you kind of need to listen to what we're telling you. If you don't, and you're doing this as an art or a hobby or whatever, then fine. You don't have to worry about marketing, but you have to start marketing your game the minute you have the first screenshot. You've got to build a community around that game. And you can't get to the point where, and I still get this phone call, 20 some years of doing this. Developer calls me, hey, we're launching next month. We haven't done any marketing and we don't have a marketing budget. So what can we do to help people find our game? And I'm just like, pick a god and start praying. It doesn't matter which one, just pick one and go, because that's the only thing that's going to help you at this point in time. And that's probably not going to do a whole lot of good either. But you have to, if you don't do that work while you're leading up to your launch, you're not going to be able to, be found and be discovered. And it's not just developers. We see publishers do this too, so you've got to build that community from day one.
So what you're saying is you have to get your customers before you have your product.
In some ways. Yeah. I mean, you need something to show on that product to get it. But that can start with something as easy as, a single screenshot or a GIF of your character running, or, what have you. You've got to build it at the same time, basically. It's if you're building cars, it's like, okay, we've got a frame and the tires picked out. Let's see who likes that. And we're going to build as we go along. It gets better and better. We'll get more people. That's the basic premise of it. And you have to understand that you're going to, especially as a new studio, you're going to start with nothing. I mean, it's like our Discord server for the podcast. I didn't know why we needed a Discord server. My co-host Dan was like, you have a Twitch channel, you have to have a podcast now. I mean, a Discord server. I'm like, whatever, dude, there's like 8 people watching us on Twitch. Well, we started it 2.5 years ago, and now we've got 2,600 people in the industry that are in that server. So you have to start somewhere, and you can't wait until, you're getting ready to do your Kickstarter, or you're just launching on early access, or God forbid, you're actually launching the game and you haven't done any sort of marketing or community building. You're going to have a very bad day if that's the case.
I love the point you just made that, you had a Twitch channel and like 8 people are watching, if that, and you had to start this other thing. How hard is it to get over that urge to just quit? Like, because no one's really involved, no one's really interested, but then after time, like it'll grow. I'm
stubborn. That's part of my, business acumen anyway. So I didn't worry about how many people were watching. I knew the stuff that we were doing was, what you would refer to as evergreen content. We're not like other streams, and you have to remember, Indie Game Business was just a side project, a hobby of mine. That was not something that was intended at all to turn into what it is today. I just did it because I thought it was fun. And I knew that whether or not people were watching us live was less of an issue, as opposed to people being able to find this information when they needed it. How do I find a publisher? And this is, way back pre-pandemic. We started doing these shows the Twitch channel like in 2018. And so if you wanted to know things like how to market a game, or how to publish your game, or how to find a publisher, or things like that, you could Google up some, talks from conferences, but most of those, because those conferences put them behind paywalls, were 3 or 4 years old, and in many cases irrelevant at that point. But I knew that if we put that content out there, people would find it useful. I really didn't care how many people were watching us live, because it wasn't meant to be a live thing anyway. And so what kept me going, and what kept me from just going, screw this, nobody cares, is I was having fun. I mean, I basically found a way to call up my friends over the last 2 decades and go, hey, you want to talk about business stuff for like an hour on a podcast? And that's what we've done now for 3 years.
What was the impetus for starting Indie Game Business? Because you had the Powell Group, and that was going along pretty well. But then, like, why? And now you have kind of conferences. Like, what was that about?
So, one of my complaint, I don't know what language filter we can use on the show. One of my complaints about the industry has always been the people that need to know, the information that they give out at conferences, in these sessions, the people who need it most can't afford to go to those sessions. And the people like me who can afford to go, we don't go, because we either already know that stuff, or, if I want to know what Epic's working on, I pick up and call my friends at Epic and go, so what's new in the engine, or what's new on this going on? We didn't need it. And so there was an attempt about 9-10 years ago for me to solve that problem by doing, what business people do. It's like, I wrote a bunch of white papers, and then I realized that nobody reads white papers in this industry, and I don't even read them, and I was writing them. So for a while, it was like we needed to find a way to teach developers this stuff, because the realization that I had 10 years ago was, I have knowledge, and a lot of us in this industry have knowledge that we don't realize others don't have. We just assume it. I assume if you're a developer, you know how to go find a publisher. That's not the reality. that's not the case. And so after we learned that nobody reads white papers, it just kind of like, bounced around for a while. And it was like one night, middle of the night, I popped up and I went, oh my God, why don't we just do conference sessions on Twitch? Twitch is a thing now. That's what we can do. And so I literally called the only streamer that I knew, and that was Dan Long, who's indie. And I'm like, this is what I want to do, and I can do the content, but I don't know the very first thing about streaming. And Dan was like, this sounds really cool. Yeah, I'll help you. And so we've been doing it now for 3 years. And so once we got it out there, and I was like, okay, look, we have a way for people to find this stuff. If you want to know about this and you can't afford to fly to San Francisco or London or Germany or wherever the conference is, we're giving you a means to find it. But the next step was, if they can't, get on a plane and go and get this information, they can't, use that information in a setting to network and to get new deals and meet with publishers and marketing teams and all this other stuff. And that's where the idea for the digital conference came along. But that was in late 2018. Our first digital conference was in 2019. And so we spent a year trying to get people to pay attention that we were doing something new and cool, and no one cared. And then 2020 happened, and everybody's like, oh my God, we have to have digital conferences. And I'm like, I know, we've been doing them for a year already. So it was a lot of finding ways to, get knowledge out there that wouldn't cost development studios an arm and a leg and only happen 1 or 2 times a year to do it.
Beautiful. Okay. Now, Jay, I want to get a little more personal if possible, because I like focusing on the person in front of me rather than the industry as a whole. So I'd like you to hop in a time machine with me. We're going to go back in time. We're going to go, right when you were being an analyst, I think you called yourself, right? When you're playing games, hopefully for cash.
Yes, it was. I mean, I took the job because I needed beer money. So yeah, that was cash. Yeah.
So you get to go back and you get to talk to the little Jay way back then. You get to tell him all the good, the bad, all the ups and the downs. You get to tell him every experience that you've had. You get to lay out the path for him that he's going to get to travel. And you get to tell him everything that he needs to know in order to make his life bigger, better, faster, more awesome, more successful than you currently have it if you could have had that knowledge back then. But if there was one thing he absolutely had to know, what would that one thing be?
Listen to your wife and actually enjoy where you're traveling more. That's one of the big ones. And now when I travel, when I used to travel, hopefully when we start traveling again, I actually send my wife updates on Instagram and pictures of like, look, I am out seeing things. I'm not in a conference hall the whole time I'm here, because there's a lot of places that I've been able to go to and cultures that I've been able to meet with. But it's like, okay, you land at the airport, you go to the hotel, you go to the conference, you go back to the hotel, you go back to the airport, you go home. I bet you I had been going to San Francisco for 10 years before I saw the Golden Gate Bridge. And so it's, that one on a experience level would be it. On the make your life better size, it would have been get your ADHD diagnosed at 21 instead of 38, because that has been the biggest change in my overall life and managing all of that sort of stuff. But so yeah, it would have to, I can't narrow it down to one, Bradford. It's just too, but I would go with those two.
Okay, fantastic. Now, even more personal than that. You see, Jay, I believe that we learn the most in our life from our failures, not necessarily our successes. Because when you succeed the first time at something, you may not realize what happened. And you just go like, oh, cool, right. But if you fail, you got to take a look at it. You got to figure out what went wrong to be able to move past it, move forward to succeed the next time. So I'd like to ask you, what do you consider your biggest failure in life? And what did you learn from it?
I would say my first inclination is to say the first company that I founded that went under, but there wasn't a lot that we took away from that one because it was such a weird time in the industry anyway. I'll probably go back, about 5 or 6 years to when things got really lean at the consulting firm and I had to lay a bunch of people off. It's something that happens in the industry to everybody. We know it, but it's one thing when you're doing your job just for you. And I didn't again, I didn't start the Powell Group for it to turn into, the company that it is now. I started the Powell Group because I didn't want to move to the West Coast and get a job at some big corporation that I knew I would hate. So I was like, screw it, I'll do it myself. But the realization that you take on when you become not only the sole provider or not the sole provider, but the provider for you and your family, but you're also responsible for the well-beings of other people and their family. That was one of the hardest things to do. Is like I kept people employed out of guilt longer than I should have from a business standpoint, and it ended up, causing hardships on this side of the company on my side and then the family side because I just couldn't do it. And so it taught me to plan ahead much further, but also how to manage staff and don't bring on a bunch of people if you don't sure you can keep them on. But I mean, I don't know if it's the biggest failure in my life, but it's certainly the one that I still carry the most guilt for to this day, even though that I have almost rehired all of those people back. So,
okay. Now, as a consultant, how hard or easy is it getting clients?
The benefit is, so the unique place that we are, is, especially as a small consulting firm, is that you don't need that many clients. If you have 2 or 3, you're okay. And if you have more than that, you're good to go. It hasn't ever, well, I wouldn't say it wouldn't ever. There obviously have been times when it was harder because we had to do layoffs. But in general, most of our clients come word of mouth. And, overall, we do a really good job with what we do. I don't overpromise stuff. I have developers come to me like, can you guarantee us a publishing deal? I'm like, no one can. If I could, my business model would be completely different. It's like, we can put you in the best position to succeed, but no, I can't promise you anything. We're fortunate in that, we've never had to do a whole lot of marketing, although now you can say that Indie Game Business is a bit of marketing for us, but it's always been word of mouth. And so as long as we've been doing a good job, and I do what we call the basic blocking and tackling of business development, going out and talking to people and that sort of stuff, we're fine. And we do well. This isn't a company that I'm looking to grow and then spin off and then have an exit strategy. Because I get people that's like, what's your exit strategy? And I'm like, death? I have no idea. I mean, who buys a consulting firm? So that is where I feel, we should be. And it's always been word of mouth. Even back in the day when we were doing the agency, even then it was word of mouth. The first attempt or time we've ever started marketing anything was when we started doing this with Indie Game Business. And then I had to learn, how do you market a podcast? How do you market a digital conference? But it's not that hard to get clients if you do what you say you're going to do. And you can turn around and say, okay, look, and if you don't believe me, here's like 6 companies that you can talk to that we've worked with the last year. And are they going to tell us that, we tripled their revenue every 3 months? No, they're not. But they're going to tell you, I'll do what I say I'm going to do. And in this industry, that's the most important thing anyway.
I love it. Okay, now you gave us the 2 major problems that the development studios have, which was money and then marketing. If you had one piece of advice that, if you had to like wrap something up, this as example, this podcast with, what would that one piece be?
Start building your community day one, because that community can take care of both of your funding and your marketing problems by itself in a best case scenario. It's not always going to do it, but it should. You've got to have that community for your team. For your game, whether you get a publisher or not, because, we used to get a fair number of publishers that didn't want to touch anything that had already been released on early access. There are still publishers like that, but there's a lot of other publishers that we send stuff to, and their first question is, how many wish lists do they have? And you're not going to have those wish lists. You're not going to be able to show that you can, that there is a market and an audience for your game if you don't have that community. And then you've got the folks that are like, well, I'm just going to do a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter. Anya Combs, who's the director of Kickstarter, always does an AMA at all of our conferences. You can go back and watch any of them that you want on our YouTube page. The thing that she always says that stands out to me is when you do a Kickstarter, only 30% of your money is going to come from people who aren't already in your community. So you've got to have it. That community is going to evangelize for you. They're going to tell their friends about it, and they're going to support the path that you actually have an audience that's going to help you get a publisher or an investor, or even if you self-publish, they're going to be the ones that buy it. And so the most important thing, build that community day one.
Absolutely. And that's advice I wish someone had given me years ago when I started my Kickstarter. Okay, Jay, this has been a fantastic interview. How do people find you? Where do they reach out to you? Social media, all that, please.
You can reach out to me on Twitter at Powell_J, but I suck at Twitter, so I wouldn't recommend that. All of the best places to find us is if you simply go to indiegame.business, and that website is housed on the bigger consulting firm website, so you can find everything there. Discord, wonderful community. You can always find me there as well. It's discord.gg/indiegamebusiness. And if you want to email me directly, do it. It's jay@powellgroupconsulting.com. I'm very easy to find if you try to find me out there.
Love it. Okay, Jay, now as we wrap this up, do you have any final thoughts you want to share, or anything I didn't ask you think we still need to cover?
You cut out there for a second, but yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts you want to share, or anything else that I didn't ask you think we still need to cover?
Learn. Never stop learning. Never start listening to what's in the market, and never stop playing. If you want to be in this industry, you need to be playing those games, not just making them. So going out and trying to do something and shooting for a target 2 years down the line that is constantly moving is tough. You have to enjoy this industry if you want to be in it, because God knows we can all make more money doing something else. But if you don't love what you're doing in games, then don't put yourself through the agony of the rest of the industry to do it. But if you do, just embrace it. You love what you do. If you don't love it, don't do it. I learned that lesson way too late in life. And then always be learning and building that community. That's the catch.
Beautiful. All right, Jay Powell, thank you so much for coming on today. I genuinely do appreciate it.
My pleasure. And we'll see you soon anyway.
Absolutely. All right. For everybody else, I'm going to remind you all, don't be just a gamer, be a gamerpreneur.